I'm here to introduce our speakers, but first of all, I'd like to thank our sponsors who have provided this program tonight, which is brought to you through the Shelter Island Mental Health and Wellness Group Alliance, the Shelter Island Library, and the Shelter Island School, and various other donors, individual donors that I don't have all the names for, but we greatly appreciate the contributions and making this program possible, because we think it's just something that's so important and valuable. And we're being recorded so that this program will be available after to be able to view and also perhaps show at meetings or wherever. We're hopeful to get more of this information out. So also I'll just tell you a little bit about the Health and Wellness Alliance on Shelter Island. It's a group of people who volunteer. We started during COVID. We had some professionals reach out. At the time I was the town social worker. Currently have a new one, Alexandra Alla Hakim. Is the current social worker, and she's someone you can contact if you live on the island and would like some help with anything. But our volunteers kind of came out of the woodwork. People who were part-time residents, full-time residents, and said what could they do to help? And what we started to do was really meet as a team via Zoom and talk about how could we help the community stay somewhat connected or feel connected to something during those times when it was really so isolating. So we started doing some webinars and other kinds of activities, and then since then, we've just stuck together. I continue to volunteer even though I don't work here anymore and I live in East Quogue, but I really have an affinity and I care about the Rock, Shelter Island. And so tonight this is one of the things that we've been talking about for quite a while, as far as the importance and what's going on with social media and the internet and everything else. And I don't think I have to even say, I think we all agree that that's a lot. So I will now introduce our wonderful speakers tonight. First I'll introduce Gianna Volpe, and maybe many of you are familiar with her from our local WLIW 88.3 FM, the only NPR station on Long Island. And Gianna has programs in the morning from 9 to 11, and then it's also replayed at midnight. And I have to tell you, sometimes I actually am listening to it at midnight if I've missed it, because she has some amazing interviews and also great music selections. And she did a wonderful interview with Dr. Kardaras the other morning for us. It was wonderful. And now our primary speaker tonight, an expert, is Dr. Nicholas Kardaras, and I'm going to read this because I don't want to miss it, and I liked it. Is an Ivy League educated psychologist, best-selling author, internationally renowned speaker, and an expert on mental health, addiction, and the impacts of our digital age. He's currently a professor at Stony Brook Medicine, and he's going back there. He hadn't been there in a while. He's going back full-time there, and has developed clinical treatment programs all over the country, including Maui Recovery in Hawaii and Omega Recovery in Austin. And he'll mention something about Maui at some point. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Glow Kids, and which was a seminal book on the clinical, neurological, and sociological aspects of technology addiction, which has been translated into 13 languages, and the more recent Digital Madness, which is the book we're featuring here, and how social media is driving our mental health crisis. He has also written for Time Magazine, Scientific American, Psychology Today, Salon, the New York Daily News, and Fox News, and has appeared on ABC's 2020, Good Morning America, CBS Evening News, Fox and Friends, NPR, Good Day, and on and on. And I hear you have a TED Talk also, correct? So at any rate, I don't think I can say much more. And he lives in Sag Harbor. So we are so fortunate that he's out here on the East End, and he's traveled all over. He continues to travel depending on the needs of his treatment facilities and speaking requests, I'm sure. But basically, he's here with his family, and I know his wife and at least one son, or maybe two sons, okay, are here. I see there's two back there. So at any rate, I'm going to turn it over to both Gianna and Dr. Kardaras Janet's going to help with her great interview skills.
Hey,
And
thanks, I will.
I'll let you take it away. Oh, let me just mention, we're going to try to finish by about 5 to 8 so that we have a good Q&A period for questions, because that's going to be important. If you have questions, we want you to be able to get them answered as well as the folks on Zoom.
All right, so I really want to start basically, and you know they say this is your brain on social media, just to adapt that 90s commercial. So let's start, Dr. Kardaras, by talking about how the brain works, especially when seeking pleasure.
Yeah, in 30 minutes or less, yeah. Yeah, so the brain has evolved over a period of literally hundreds of thousands of years, and evolutionarily, there's no part of the brain that gets left behind. So the most primal part of the brain is the reptilian. This is the triune brain model by McLaren, was a neurophysiologist who developed a brain model that said our most basic brain is the reptilian brain, right? That's the one that's wrapped around our brain stem, and that's the one that's the fight or flight brain. And then evolutionarily, as we evolved from reptiles to mammals, the mammalian brain became wrapped around. So if this is the reptilian brain, we have the mammalian brain, and the mammalian brain allowed species to have emotional connection. That's the
So with the frontal,
not there yet.
but is that part of the mammalian brain?
No.
Oh.
So the prefrontal cortex is the most recent evolutionary adaptation of the brain. That's our.
So that is part of the mammalian brain then?
It's
the brake system?
So reptilian,
yes.
mammalian, and
yes.
then prefrontal cortex.
Oh,
the last 25 to 35,000 years, that's our cognitive brain, the brain that allows us to consequentially think, the part of our brain that gives us our intellect. That's the part that's most recently evolved. Digital media and a lot of the world that we're talking about, what we're going to talk about today, really tickles or impacts that primal reptilian brain, that
right.
fight or flight, that fear response, that emotional reactivity, that's reptilian and mammalian. Bypassing the prefrontal cortex is also the place where our decision making lives. Right. So when we make decisions, we do what's called consequential thinking. That lives in the prefrontal cortex, which is right behind our forehead. That part gets negatively impacted by screen time. What they found with substance addiction, they did fMRI studies for decades now that showed that chronic substance addiction shrinks the prefrontal cortex. So that part of our brain that allows us to make good decisions actually gets physiologically compromised. It gets shrunken. And it's technically to the DGM, the dense gray matter of that part of our brain shrinks. So chronic substance addicts don't make good decisions, and they're highly impulsive because that part of the brain that allows them to not be impulsive has gotten compromised.
And over time, it gets more and more damaged.
Some people call that part of our prefrontal cortex the brakes. We'll call it our braking system. The reptilian brain is the gas. If we put our foot on the gas, it's all our primal needs. And the prefrontal cortex allows us to pump the brakes and say, maybe we shouldn't do it. We have an urge to do something, but maybe I shouldn't do that because of this consequential thinking that I can do. What they have found with technology is affecting that part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making brain, in the same way that substances do.
So the reptile brain says scroll.
Right.
But the more you scroll, the less you have the ability to stop.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so what a lot of people were shocked about, there were about a dozen brain imaging studies over the last 7 to 8 to 9 years that showed that the brain neurophysiology actually can get impacted by not something that we're ingesting, but something that we're viewing.
Right.
So you actually have shrinkage of that part of the brain by your viewing habits. Not, because people could understand how if I ingest a narcotic, it's going to change my brain neurophysiology, but they were shocked to see that
the same thing can happen when you're just viewing something. Right. So let's bring social media a little bit further into this and talk about the algorithm, how social media algorithms work, and what this can potentially do, especially to our young people, as far as the types of content that it's feeding to people, and the extremification elements to all of that.
Can I, before I answer
Whatever
that,
you
can I
want to
say-
do, go for it.
I think it's important that I think we all begin to realize, because I think what happened as a society, this is what I've written about quite a bit, we fell in love with technology. It became a technological love affair, and we weren't quite fully appreciative of some of the negative aspects of technology over the last 10 to 15 to 20 years. And people of a certain generation, and I'm 59, people of my age and older, conflated modern screen time with television. Many of us grew up on television, and we said, what can go wrong? I grew up on television, but wasn't so fun. And we can all remember, there was...
But this is a television that watches you.
This is
television. This is like, it's not the same thing as however many minutes of commercial break. This is, I can tell what content you are responding to and what you want.
Well, and beyond that, it's portable, so it's ubiquitous. So we didn't carry our 30-inch black and white TVs in our back pocket. And the real main psychodynamic driver is it's interactive and immersive.
Right.
Yesteryear's television was a passive viewing experience. So when we watched Starsky and Hutch or MASH, it was a TV on the wall, or my parents' here was a big piece of furniture, and we were a passive viewer of that visual experience. Now, young people are interactive. Right. They're in it. They're immersed in it.
And driving the content as well.
Right. So that immersivity. So it's important to keep that in mind, because that's what kind of drives the fact that it spikes our dopamine more because of this immersive, interactive aspect. It's more dopamine activating. We call it dopaminergic. So it's more habit forming. And what happens when you take a social species like we are as human beings, you take social animals like humans who are meant to be face-to-face interactive, and we're meant to be physically active, and now you've taken the species and we become sedentary and screen staring and isolated. And those ingredients have driven what we're attributing to this depression and isolation epidemic that we're having. Depression rates have skyrocketed before COVID. So in 2019, before COVID, with the highest rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, overdose, all the psychiatric metrics were spiking.
And what about the physical side? Because it's
cancer
also
rates, diabetes, all the health metrics were at an all-time low, and disproportionately impacting young people. So when you looked at the generational cohorts, right, when you looked at baby boomer, Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, Gen Z rather, the younger the cohort, the worse their psychiatric metrics. So something was happening where we saw that the more a generation was immersed in their technology, the more mentally unwell they became. And so we have to understand, as a social species, we weren't meant to be staring at a screen on a very fundamental level. We weren't meant to be screen staring, atomized, sedentary, isolated. It just goes, it's antithetical to our psychological DNA. And it happened gradually, and then it happened quickly, and then COVID. And so COVID was an amplifier of all these dynamics.
the digital hard right.
Right, we became more isolated, more quarantined, and more screen dependent. And that's why we saw psychiatric metrics go through the roof, amplified by COVID.
Right.
So then you were saying, you asked about algorithms.
I was going to go into the Beyond Therapy chapter and talk about how that could actually be a complication, but I think we'll wait. Keep going, Doctor. I'm sorry.
So 2010, you had iPhones and iPads. We started seeing a shift in our mental health as the advent of some of the, I usually carry my phone to bring out Exhibit A. I don't have my phone on me, so I can't
you can borrow mine.
This device came along, and we started seeing a correlation with plummeting mental health metrics. And when I wrote a book, I wrote a book about philosophy years ago, but I wrote a book called Glow Kids. I was looking at what does this do neurophysiologically to us when we interact with it, and the habit forming aspects of it. Then what we started seeing with social media, because at that point there was a lot of gaming platforms, and a lot of adolescent boys were just really stuck on their Minecraft or their World of Warcraft and for hours and hours and hours, because the dopamine effect was much more powerful than, for some of you that may know or may not know, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that correlates to our experiencing of, it's a feel-good neurotransmitter. And evolutionarily, it was built into our bodies to incentivize certain things that keep us alive as a species. So dopamine is released when we eat, and dopamine is released when we procreate, and those were two life-sustaining.
If there's something that's providing you dopamine over time, your body stops making it naturally, right?
Right. You go.
And do you end up becoming more dependent
right.
on whatever it is?
Right. So that's
because that's where your dopamine's coming from.
Similarly to addiction, you get desensitized to certain amounts, so you need higher and higher amounts. When you develop tolerance in the substance addiction. With screen time, kids or people will be desensitized to it. They'll plateau out, and they'll need a higher level of intensity.
Right.
That's why predictive algorithms, if you ever watch a YouTube video about a kitty video, then they'll have to send you a kitty video with 5 cats in it or 10 cats in it, because they'll have to raise the intensity. That's the extremification loop, because the name of the game with any kind of digital media and big tech is engagement.
Right.
And engagement is how we are monetized, as we are the product, we are the consumers for big tech. The most powerful companies that have ever existed, by the way, because they control what we see, what we feel, how we vote, how we experience the world.
It's funny because this actually feeds back into the lizard brain, because it's not enough that it's showing you something that it thinks you're going to like, but it has to ramp it up, because that says to the lizard brain, oh, here's something that'll really get you
and not necessarily
jumping.
But fear
Yes,
as well.
right.
Because fear is a big emotional
activator. The lizard brain is the thing that makes you jump out of bed when you hear the alarm, because that's like the wolf. Oh, there's something. Something's in here.
Well, so those of us that are old enough to remember the old Walter Cronkite days when there was 30 minutes of news a night, and it was Walter Cronkite and Tom Brokaw. We got our news in 30-minute segments, and there was no news axiom that if it bleeds, it leads. Because the news industry understood that anything that aroused our emotional reactivity increased engagement. But they only gave us 30 minutes of it bleeds, it leads.
Right,
now,
it wasn't 24-hour news
what
cycle.
happened was 1979, 1980 was CNN. That was when Ted Turner invented CNN, and now we had a 24/7 news cycle. Now they had to find content to fill up that time. And so the 24/7 news cycle was the beginning of a lot of, some people track helicopter parenting to CNN, because that was the beginning of scaring parents about every boogeyman that might hurt your child. So now, what was called the indoor child,
the stranger danger days in the 90s, I was like the only kid playing on the street anymore. And all the other parents were like, what's wrong with her parents? Because she shouldn't be outside by herself. All the kids left.
Ironically, most of us were raised from sunup to sundown kids. Most of us were allowed to go out and play. And ironically, when we became parents, we became terrified, and we kept our kids locked indoors because there was all these boogeymen out.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to...
By the way, I don't mean to interrupt, Jim, but statistically, according to the FBI statistics, it's the safest time to be a child right now. This is not a more dangerous period to be a kid. We just have more information overload about bad things that can happen to you because of 24/7 news cycles.
Yeah, and what I liked about what you were talking about, and that you were talking about the 24/7 news cycle, is that one of the parts that I really responded to was the information about the rise of mass shootings and school shootings in general. And you talk about how the first school shooting, I think, was 1966.
66, the UT Tower shooting. Yeah.
Okay, and then there was, and it was like in the wake of, Walter Cronkite or whoever's reporting the news at the time, there was a copycat shortly after.
Right.
Then it was quiet.
Right.
Versus now, when everyone knows what's going on in every part of the country all the time, those numbers are vastly different.
Right, so Columbine was 1999, Klebold and Harris were the first internet era school shooters. And so this was the age now of things going viral, copycats, social contagions.
Please talk about social contagions and
well, now we have
this topic.
Well, social contagions. So we know, like social learning theory, that we're a social species. We emulate one another. We follow the pack. If you run with wolves, you become a wolf. And we know that in social learning theory, this is how we function as a social species. And typically, our social world used to be our school or our family or our friends, and that was our social environment. Now it's a digital landscape that has become much more amplified, and so now our role models are oftentimes digital, and so now we have things like influencers, and so influencers aren't just Kim Kardashian and toxic values, but influencers are now potentially things like school shooters, or there's a whole host right now of psychiatric influencers that are very popular. If you watch platforms like TikTok or Instagram, there are TikTok influencers that have Tourette's disorder, borderline personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, what we used to call multiple personality disorder, gender dysphoria. And some people, like myself and some colleagues, and I think that the huge spike in gender dysphoria is attributable to a social contagion effect, that if you're a lost, empty young person and you're looking for identity or you're looking for meaning, you're looking for purpose, rather than getting it from...
You could confuse someone else's journey with what you're going through.
Yeah, you could drop into a tribe, a digital tribe.
I'm glad you talked about borderline, because I think it's a really important topic, not just borderline personality disorder, but black and white thinking distortion. Can you talk about the rise societally in black and white thinking and divide not just politically, but of all things into a sort of binary...
binary thinking.
Yes.
So for the folks who don't know, borderline personality disorder is a personality disorder that's typified. One of its primary symptoms is black and white thinking. And it's very... And
you're
also,
good or you're evil.
I love you, I hate you.
I love you, I hate you.
And also, there's high emotional reactivity. So typically people with BPD have black and white thinking, highly emotionally reactive. They're very volatile. It's a very entrenched, difficult to treat disorder. But again, the black and white thinking is the dominant piece. And I have a treatment program in Austin, Texas, where we treat young adults, and we see this huge spike in borderline personality disorder. So as I was treating that, and I was looking at our societal landscape, we started seeing increased reactivity, more black and white thinking as a society. And then you start looking at, what is social media at its essence? What's the DNA of social media? Well, social media isn't nuanced critical thinking, right? Where social media lives, because social media drives engagement by inflaming the lizard brain that we talked about earlier. So an influencer is not going to be a thoughtful person that's having a nuanced discussion about topic A, B, or C. The person that's going to be a successful person on social media is going to be the person that lights up your emotional reactivity. So what happens is it creates a polarity chasm. So all of a sudden now the people that are really thriving or really influencers in social media are either amplifying their what the content that they send to you, extreme left, extreme right, extreme psychiatric, extreme. Again, you're not going to find a subtle, nuanced intellect with 100 million followers, but you're going to find somebody with dissociative identity disorder with 10 million followers, because it's very performative, it's very extreme emotional behavior. And on the political scale, we've seen the polarization in our politics like some people say like we've never seen before, because if you put it through the prism of social media, what it does is it amplifies and divides. Where 20 or 30 years ago, we might be on a college campus and we might have a civil discourse of opposing political beliefs, but now we've created this reactivity model. And people that have been raised on social media, I'm convinced more and more, don't have the ability to have thoughtful, engaged discussions because they're too emotionally triggered.
You know, you talked about, Jen,
I would add to that we've lost it used to go attitudes, opinions, beliefs, but social media has created a whole younger generation that disorder for beliefs, and beliefs are really hard to change.
And it's also made it an emotions economy. Right? I'm a believer of that part of the antidote, critical thinking, is eroded. And part of the antidote now is well, we're not using critical thinking, and the skill of critical thinking is not being taught. So now in our emotions economy, my emotional reaction trumps your logic. And we have to then navigate these treacherous emotional waters. And again, at the end of the day, these predictive algorithms, they act like heat-seeking missiles
Right.
that seek out emotional vulnerability.
Because you mentioned gender dysphoria, but let's talk about body dysmorphia and the way that the algorithm plays to, let's say, someone with anorexia nervosa,
Right.
and why this really sort of ethically implicates the folks at the top of some of these companies, because they
Right.
definitely know what, Dr.
Well, and we
Kardaras?
know this because Frances Haugen was the Facebook whistleblower.
Right.
Actually, it's the Instagram whistleblower, but she pulled back the curtain. You know, she was on 60 Minutes and testified in front of the Senate a year and a half, 2 years ago. Frances Haugen exposed the emails of Instagram where there were internal discussions. Well, first of all, they had internal research that showed that adolescent female girls, sorry for the redundancy, that were going on Instagram had, in Great Britain, they had 13% higher rates of suicidality, and in the US, 6% higher rates of suicidality. And they said the algorithm is inflaming their psychiatric distress. Typically, it was body dysmorphia or body
So the
image issues.
extremification loop is at play here, because if they see a video where someone is, looking malnourished or underweight.
Well, if the algorithm would smell that if anybody had any body image issue, they would bombard them with content related to body image,
Dieting
skin
and
and bones, 100 calories or less. The Wall Street Journal did an investigative report where they created 13 fictitious bots that their profile were adolescent girls with body image issues. And within 24 hours, they were bombarded with thousands and thousands of images of skeletal, because if you have an eating disorder, watching images like that is
it's
toxic,
triggering, yeah.
but you can't look away. It's like looking at a car crash. You know that it's not really good to look at it, but you can't look away. And so these internal emails that said, I think we're hurting these teenage girls. I think we're doing some damage. And should we turn down the algorithm and make it less predatory? And the response was, I'm paraphrasing, hell no. It's going to reduce profits. It's going to reduce engagement. It's a classic example of profit over people. And so they knew, their playbook knew very clearly that making people more unwell was good for business. And suicides be damned. And we know that during the digital age now, adolescent female suicide rates have doubled. And this was pre-COVID. And so these predatory
I didn't know
practices,
that. That's
right,
very hard to hear.
female suicide rates have gone up way more than male suicide rates. The other way that depression rates have spiked amongst young people is something called the social comparison effect. So the social comparison effect affects all of us to some degree, right? But the younger you are, the more vulnerable you are to some of these psychological effects. So the social comparison effect basically means that the more people that I have to compare myself to, the more it might amplify my sense of low self-worth. So if we have 500 Facebook friends, and let's face it, what do we post on Facebook? We're posting happy vacation photos and look how wonderful my life is. Rare is here's me having a lousy day. So we're posting our idealized external selves. And if I'm having a rough week, month, year, or life, and I'm going through my Facebook feed and all I'm seeing is happy family photo, happy successful shop, it amplifies my sense of, via comparison, wow, maybe my life is not all it's cracked up to be, so my depression rate spikes. So that's been documented through a multitude of studies that looked at this social comparison effect and depression rates going up.
That's something we can all.
Well, the great lie that we were all told when social media came out. Remember when social media first came out, we were told we're a social species, it's going to be the great connector, it's going to be great for human because we're going to be a social species with this new social medium. It was going to be like chocolate and peanut butter. It was going to be this wonderful mixing of, and what we found was that people, instead of being more socially connected, became more isolated and more depressed and more comparing. And it had the opposite.
Well, and less time spent outside when you're sitting inside looking at everyone else on vacation.
Right.
There's less time for you to go on vacation yourself. That's my commercial for everyone to go on vacation. All right, so let's talk. I did want to touch a little bit on some senior concerns. I wanted to talk about the ways in which older folks can be preyed upon as well as a result of our technology, our new technologies.
Phishing, financial scams.
We mentioned in the other room about voice recognition and about how they're using maybe even your loved one's voice or information gathered about your family to say, oh, it's your grandson. You know, I'm in the ER, or, you know, I need X, Y, and Z. What are some scams that you've come across in your time?
Well, I mean, I think most of us got emails 5 or 10 years ago that said, I'm your friend Bob, and I'm stranded in the UK, and I need you to wire me $10,000. But now with AI and ChatGPT, you have now actual voice.
And I mean, I've noticed, I mean, one of my favorite things to do on the face space on Facebook is to identify my fake friends. So there's a lot of cloning nowadays where they clone your friend's profile, then they add you, and then, you know, they start up a conversation, and I'm sure it ends in getting money from you somehow. I never get there because I'm too busy blocking and reporting them.
Sadly.
Well, one thing, I'll give you a tip. If you see a friend pop up in your friend requests, they love to use the person's regular profile picture, but then they add a filter. So it's usually something around the photo. And the best thing that you can do at that time is, if it looks fishy to you, search in your little search bar for your friends, and you'll see, oh, my friend is still there. And then you can, you know, oh, I'm reporting this as suspicious, this is not my friend. They're pretending to be someone else. And then when you type in, they say, oh, who are they pretending to be? 9 times out of 10, if you start writing your friend's name in that little bar, you'll see that same picture pop up with no filter, and you'll know this was someone that's just hoping that they can use your personal social network to try to scam you out of money.
Yeah, and I think even if they use names that you know, I mean, it's the old bit of advice. It's just never give out any social security number, bank information, PIN access, and never give out any personal information, because some of them are very sophisticated. Some of them look like your bank or look like, but with AI, there's just a higher level of sophistication now. So again, predatory tactics against vulnerable populations, whether they're teenagers or seniors, seniors who may not be as versed with the digital landscape and how to navigate it, so they might be a little bit more vulnerable to some of these tactics. So we have to never give any of our personal information out.
And then for either age, the extremification loop that we've been talking about a lot is something that, if you're not aware of, can lead you down a bad path. I know we talked about Corey Johnson on the air, but who is Corey Johnson? And while he's an extreme example, what is the end game? Where does the extremification loop potentially end if you can't stop yourself from scrolling and you go down an extreme rabbit hole?
Yeah, Jen talking about Corey Johnson was a case that I worked on as an expert witness in Palm Beach County, Florida. There was a capital murder case, and it was a reflection of this idea that a lot of our young people today are really lost. They're really drifting. They're really empty. We're struggling, I think, having worked in mental health for 24 or 5 years now, with a crisis of emptiness, junk values, materialism, the things that used to give our lives intrinsic meaning and purpose, whether it was faith or family or country or things that maybe are considered cliche today. So there's a lot of young people that have an emptiness,
They're
a void.
seeking attachment, and when it used to be peers and whatnot, now it's this thing.
They're seeking for
and
a
it's
team,
not,
right?
and it's not a suitable
Well,
replacement.
so if the general profile is, and the low-hanging fruit for a lot of what we're talking about is essentially
Loner.
extremist groups that are predatory on, and the low-hanging fruit is the lost, empty young male. So our society right now is full of young, empty men who don't have a sense of anything. And I work with a lot of these young men. They just feel they're tabula rasas, they're just blank slates. And they're looking for community, they're looking for purpose, they're looking for meaning. And
I saw this coming too. I remember, like, in the beginning of all of this social media, I was like, when are radical extremist groups going to start digitally infiltrating our youth?
And that's what's happened.
And and radicalizing them, or some of them that
so the FBI,
don't know better.
Yeah, the FBI has given out a report. So some of these radical groups, extreme left-wing, right-wing, and Islamic fundamentalist groups are actively recruiting through chat rooms like 4chan, through YouTube, through different digital media platforms. And again, the low-hanging fruit is the empty young male. And Corey Johnson was an example of this. This was a 16-year-old kid, single mom, Palm Beach County, lost his father, felt empty. Long story short,
didn't see, the red flags.
He was in his room on the computer. He was safe. And what was fascinating about his case is he went through he cycled through a few identities before he landed on Islamic extremism. And he first went from progressive liberal to, at one point he started watching, because all this kid did was watch YouTube videos. Every waking moment.
If you think about it, it's not so unusual for a young person to go through some identities, try different clothes.
We all used to go to the different lunchrooms.
And try different school. Oh, I went through my punk phase, and now I'm in my grunge phase. But the extremification element to the algorithm is particularly problematic, especially when this young kid sees a shocking video of a beheading.
Wait, that's not how he started. He didn't start there.
And then he sees.
But he didn't start there.
Where did he start?
So he watched he was politically interested, so he went down progressive liberalism, then he went down, he became a white supremacist at one point because he watched a video about the Holocaust. And because he watched a video about the Holocaust, the algorithm started feeding him.
Oh, like a denier type of
videos.
Okay.
And so in about 3 to 4 months, he became a white supremacist. And then
this is when I get mad, and I'm like, I wish there was more news literacy taught in schools.
Well, then what happened was he watched a random short video about Syria and Assad and the conflict that was happening in Syria. And because he was a smart kid, I spent several hours with him in maximum security, Dade County Prison. A very bright kid who committed a very horrific crime. He tried to murder multiple people and essentially decapitated an 11-year-old boy. And this was a kid who people had said, generally, growing up was a sweet kid that would never hurt a fly. And what really left me, when I went home to my wife, I was expecting to meet a sociopath. He'd been in prison about 9 months because his trial got delayed because of COVID. I wanted to meet a sociopath. I didn't want to believe that this kid was the average kid next door, because that's more unsettling to realize that this could happen to the quote-unquote normal kid, that he could have gone so deeply down the dark rabbit hole that he committed one of the most gruesome crimes imaginable. And when I spoke to him 9 months after he'd been in prison and no longer in social media, he had landed back a little bit to the normal kid that he used to be, polite, eye contact, regretted the crimes that he had committed. But he got sucked down the rabbit hole. It became, essentially, it was like a cult. It became, these extremist groups are very sophisticated. When they showed me some of the videos that he was sent, and I was showed by the prosecutor, by the FBI at the time, ISIS at that time made Al-Qaeda look like peanuts. It was 4 to 5 really sophisticated videos,
highly
every day in multiple languages. If I saw some of those videos, if I was an empty 16-year-old kid,
and that's watching for hours upon hours,
it
zombified.
Made ISIS look like they were community-oriented, they were a good organization helping society.
Well, that's
and
what
if you didn't know better, it was a good
right?
propaganda video. And he fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And by the end of 8 months, he was totally brainwashed.
And when you think about that case, then it makes you understand what you were talking about before about beliefs and how people can, just by going down a rabbit hole of what, and there's as many rabbit holes as there are, ideas in the world. You have great music, a convincing person talking to you, a nice animation. You watch 4 or 5 videos, you could believe just about anything.
Well, as I wrote in Digital Madness, back in the day, when you were indoctrinated into a cult, you needed a charismatic cult leader and ideology, and it took some effort. Now in this digital world, it's a lot easier to suck someone in who's vulnerable, lost, impressionable. And so we're not going to stop that bombardment from happening. And this is where I talk about, we can't put that toothpaste back in the tube now, but what we can do is we can help our young people become more immunized. I talk about a strong psychological immune system in the same way that we talk about a viral immune system. We can help young people develop skills that will help them navigate through these treacherous waters.
Can we talk about some of the ways, Doctor?
Yes, we can.
Do you want me to go in? I have a great checklist. So I'm gonna read from Digital Madness, and then you can just expound, just talk a little further about some of these things. All right. So old school wisdom here. This is ancient wellness tips inspired by Plato and Pythagoras. One is start each day with a quiet, reflective, or contemplative walk.
Well, let me back up by saying an archetype that I think is helpful in combating the ills of the modern age is some of the ancient things that we've maybe forgotten or had learned. And so I have this archetype of a philosopher warrior. And when you think about the attributes of an ancient philosopher, think Athenian, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, critical thinking, civic responsibility, ethical discernment, compassion. These were the attributes of a philosopher. Now, when you think about a warrior, you think Sparta, think about grit, resilience, not just physical fortitude, but mental fortitude, an ability to stick-to-itivism. Because one of the deficits that I'm seeing with a lot of young people today is resilience, absolutely almost no resilience. There's no ability to lean into adversity. So the philosopher warrior goes back to being able to, can we cultivate, and that's what we do in my treatment program in Austin, we try to cultivate, in addition to traditional psychotherapy to deal with some underlying issues that might exist, can we help a person develop these skill sets to navigate this ocean of digital overload that many of our young people are swimming in. And a metaphor that I love is we're not going to make the ocean less turbulent, but we can make our young people better swimmers. And can we help them develop some of these skill sets so they don't get brainwashed and sucked in or influenced by influencers or extremist groups or anything else in between? Can we be the ones that really teach our young people to have these ingredients in their day-to-day lives?
Wouldn't it be so beautiful if everyone could go on the walk, like the whole family in the morning?
Well, so the contemplative walk just means to be able to, social media breeds navel staring self-absorption rather than self-reflection, right? So can we be self-reflective and be contemplative rather than narcissistically self-absorbed? Because the other thing of the digital world is it feeds into egocentric narcissism. So a lot of the young people that I work with, the old narrative.
Think selfies.
Well, the social workers in the room, we used to talk about.
Which is everyone.
Which is half the room. We always had the narrative that people were suffering, that our clients would be suffering from low self-esteem. And that if we could help boost people's self-esteem, there would be, rainbows and sunshine and everybody would get better. And unfortunately, a lot of our younger people today are not suffering from a deficit of self-esteem. They have an inflated narcissistic sense of self-importance.
Right.
The digital makes the user the center of the digital universe because of predictive algorithms. Think of something and it appears. It's almost a form of magical thinking that creates this sort of narcissistic bubble for a lot of young people. And so that's a
And then they go out into the world, and the world is a very different place, and they're just a dot.
Right.
And it's like, wow, right. So these are beautiful ways. So, you can start your day. set an intention. That's always a beautiful way to start. And then he continues, takes several minutes each evening to look up at the night sky and just wonder. Imagine that, just thinking.
Right, so it was this idea that we're so information overloaded that just sort of, whether you're doodling or looking up the sky and wondering, so, Plato thought all philosophy begins in wonder, but it's this idea that allowing our minds to just flow rather than just getting information bombarded into us from 1,000 different directions.
Right.
There's something really grounding about that.
Decompressing.
Right.
To paraphrase Spike Lee, do the right thing.
Ethical, correct action. Ethics does not get talked about often enough in both school systems and therapy contexts because ethics becomes a little bit of a third rail.
Whatever it is, how it made you feel.
Right, it's in the emotional economy, how does it make you feel becomes dominant rather than what's the right thing.
Oh, I love this.
And I think educators have a hard time with having conversations about ethics because that can be value subjective, but yeah.
This is one that feeds into news literacy a little bit. It's make it a point to do a dialectic each day where you challenge your own assumptions about a subject. Anything really, politics, science, the arts, re-examine what your values and beliefs are about that subject. I think this is a direct way that you can fight any rabbit hole.
Right.
Is, if you're researching flat earthism, maybe you can watch a Neil deGrasse Tyson video about how, the earth can't be flat, otherwise lunar eclipses wouldn't look the way they look. They would look different every time.
And those of us that have read any Plato vis-a-vis Socrates, or vice versa, every assumption got challenged.
Right.
The good,
Very healthy.
Everything was a question and answer, deeper probing of what we think we know, because right now everybody thinks they know everything, and Socrates was the smartest man in the ancient world because he alone knew that he knew nothing.
Yes, the fool believes he knows everything. The wise man knows he knows everything.
That's right.
All right, so do a 5-minute, oh, I like this one. I do this every day. Do a 5-minute, or more than that, music meditation each day. Ooh, where you listen to stringed, non-vocal music. Attempt to experience the music in a non-rational way. In fact, try to become the music. I know someone.
That's a Pythagorean idea. Pythagoras, our old friend. See, Pythagoras was this really cool philosopher that wasn't just a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Pythagoras is he was the first string theorist before Brian Greene. He believed that the whole universe was vibrational and harmonic.
Right.
And that if a human being was like a lyre, and if we were in correct alignment and in tune, we can be in flow. And he talked about, they would do meditations where they would pluck a lyre, and he also, by the way, he also found out that there was a mathematical correlation with music and math, that ratios were correlated with notes. And if you actually meditated on music, it had a transcendent quality on the individual.
Amen.
So that gets us easily out of egocentrism if we have this music transcendence.
Let's try to reduce maybe the rise in diabetes that has been happening exponentially in the last, decade or maybe even more now. Do 30 to 45 minutes of physical exercise every day, even if it's just taking a walk, a contemplative walk.
For the physical and psychological, the mental health aspects. I know if I don't do my little something every day, I get a little, and we all need that to just, endorphin raising, oxygenating the brain, but also, for health reasons.
All right, so we checked this one off. Make it a point to have one lively and engaged in-person discussion every day with at least one, preferably more people, about any topic you're passionate about.
Yeah, it just goes back to our need for social connection and engagement. If you study blue zones or longevity places where people live for very long periods of time, they have really strong social ties. And even better, if you could be engaging with people that you're close to about ideas that you feel powerful about, because that's what animates us as human beings.
This one is really super, super important. Very Aristotelian. value moderation in everything.
On metrio, as the Greeks would say. Yeah, if social media is extreme, the ideal life is a balanced life, and moderation. It's not cool. It's not a good sell for the extremist folks, but
And it's not always easy or possible with certain people and certain things. I do love do something creative every day, and I hope that inspires someone who hasn't done something creative yet today. Maybe get it done tonight, because we're ready for the right. So one more is to be a mentor or be mentored and honor that relationship. Super, super important. It's time for we're at 7:55, right on the nail. You gotta open it up to the floor, which is very exciting. And find out give the people what they want.
I want to thank you for a very upbeat presentation. Do you think we're just doomed because of
you
the?
took the upbeat and you.
I started with
he
a little
was
sarcasm.
joking.
That was a little sarcasm. Do you think we're just doomed because of this interplay that you talked about between technology and the First Amendment? Your solutions, of course they're right, except the people who need them most aren't really reading your book
Right.
or taking them into account. But I don't want to be too gloomy, but how can you not be gloomy knowing what you know?
Well, speak to my wife, she'll tell you I'm pretty gloomy sometimes. But in my more optimistic moments, I do work with a lot of young people, and there is a grassroots movement of people sort of really that inspire me, that we can have hope for the future, who are unplugged and are individuals and creative thinkers.
There are some amazing people in the upcoming generation that really make me feel that we don't have to worry so much.
Now, when I see about some of the AI stuff happening, I do get a little bit like, oh my God, this is going to be the end of us all soon. So I temper the gloom with a little sparks of optimism, because I do think we can. And I've noticed a shift in the last, I've been doing these talks and talking about these issues for 7, 8, 9 years now. The last 2 to 3 years, there's been a lot of awareness and pushback. A lot of people are saying here and no further to big tech, in schools, with their kids in technology, owning their humanity back. And that's what I think we need to do. We need to own our humanity and our innate sense. But I'm not you mentioned First Amendment, I'm not a censorship person. I don't think, because that's a slippery slope. When we start talking about misinformation, disinformation, that becomes a little bit
I think it's more, you're more just interested in making the algorithm less predatory.
Sure.
Just having more oversight.
There's a Senate legislation. I've worked with a couple of legislative folks to be able to opt out of algorithms, and so Senator Blumenthal and Senator Blackburn have the Social Media Safety Act, which has been sitting. They haven't passed that yet. There's different legislative initiatives. Congressman Gus Bilirakis, who I've worked with in Florida, they have different initiatives to try to beat back the advancing horde of technology so we can reclaim our humanity. So there are some, I think it has to be legislative, I think it has to be class action. There's some class action lawsuits that are happening right now where big tech is being hit like big tobacco was and like big pharma has been hit, because that's also going to be, I think, part of the solution, hopefully.
I think there was a question over here.
Mentioned a couple of times the fact that mentioned critical thinking a number of times as being, and to me it's the quintessential part of the Homo sapien brain, right? That's what distinguishes us from other species. And it's being adversely affected by social media. The people who are educating our young kids, in large part, are also, I think, adversely affected by social media. They're growing up in that age. And is that double reinforcing or making things even worse? That's making critical thinking almost impossible to achieve.
Critical thinking has classically not been taught enough in our schools anyway. I was actually very refreshed to meet a teacher in Riverhead recently who just started a class called The Black Experience in America, I think. and he wrote a book. Oh, Jamal Boyce is the man.
No, friend of mine.
Oh, he's awesome. So, and his class is all about just teaching kids how to critically think, which, you know, from my public education experience through the 90s and early millennium, we weren't really taught
But are
that.
you saying there's a group think in academia? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
essentially. And is it also, you know, the fact that so many of our educators now have grown up in that social media study. How do you correct that? Is it do you mandate social critical thinking courses?
I think adding news literacy courses is huge.
Well, I've just recently gone back to teaching at Stony Brook, and I haven't taught there in almost 10 years, and I've seen the groupthink that you're talking about, and I like to think I'm a libertarian individual thinker, and it's the landscape is entirely different. You're right, and if you want career advancement, there's a. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to integrity. So I have to.
Which isn't taught.
What's that?
Which isn't taught.
Yeah.
What else is there? Name another one. I'll tell you, it's not being taught.
You know what else isn't being taught? Like how to deal with student loans and what they are. You don't learn a lot of stuff but I think it's starting to change because I think so many people are aware of, you know, what is needed and what you don't learn and what you need to learn.
So I'm just gonna ask the question without any introduction, but in college, most colleges and assessment in college, there were 10 items that were required for a lot of professors to have and work on in their syllabi. I'm not gonna say they did or didn't, but critical thinking always was at the top 3. It really went down, and one of the ones that came up, you need to address for me, was connections. Kids in college don't make connections from one class to another and integrate what they learn or integrate them at home so they're not making connections. I don't mean relationships, I mean connection between
the
information.
Yeah.
I mean, there are
And that
curriculums
went way up to the top.
There are spiral curriculums that they're trying to create where there's an overlap of some of the subjects, but I agree with you. I don't think it's happening enough. And I do agree with the groupthink that you're saying. It's monolithic. You know, Jonathan Haidt from NYU has created the Heterodoxy Academy, which is academics and students who come together with opposing viewpoints to challenge each other respectfully and civilly to not groupthink, because there is so much groupthink right now, which is amplified by, you know, people being deplatformed and cancel culture and all those things that have really happened in the last 5 years. I mean, was there even such a thing as being canceled 6 years ago?
Yeah.
And so people are living in fear of their professional careers or being called certain labels if they speak their minds.
There were boycotts. There were boycotts before. There
Yeah, I
were
think
company
it was just a different-
boycotts, but now it's bigger, cancel culture.
It's viral, right?
Yeah.
The viral version is canceling, right? Yes.
So I'm the mother of 2 young boys who are in elementary school. I'm definitely gonna read your book. Are there any other sources, trusted sources that you've come upon that you would recommend for the parent of 2 young boys? The debate about tech is just, it's so wearisome, and I'm painted as a Luddite, and I'm old-fashioned, and all those things. And if I could read a book and say, read the facts in this book, it's not good. Are
Yes.
there any specific?
Dr. Victoria Dunkley, she's an adolescent psychiatrist. She wrote a great book called How to Reset Your Child's Brain. She's out of Los Angeles. She's wonderful, and her book is a little bit of a how-to guide and how to be a low-tech parent and how to do a digital detox in case you need to. She gives you a step-by-step, and she's wonderful. She's her book is
What is
phenomenal.
her last name?
Dunkley. It's Dunkley. Dunkley. Victoria Dunkley. And I know, I mean, I've got, my kids are sitting in the back, my twins in my town. I've got 16-year-old twins in the back, and I had to raise them in this digital world, and it's a challenge. It's
And
not
the
easy.
schools are somewhat complicit.
And the school is complicit.
And,
But no offense to the educators in the room, but the
but
schools are part of the
and
problem.
they're not helping, giving us tools.
How often do your kids How often are they on their cell phone?
Do you think that,
Do you limit how much time they spend on their cell phone?
what's that?
Do you limit how much time they spend on their cell phone?
Yeah, so they had through middle school, you guys mind if I talk about it? Through middle school, they had what was called the Gab phone. And the Gab phone was not Wi-Fi compatible, but it looked like a smartphone, so it wasn't as stigmatizing as the old flip phone.
Right.
So they had a Gab phone which allowed them to text and call and listen to music, and they did get iPhones in high school. They've been pretty good because we have looked at their time usage. They're not on any social media, right? And they're not, we leaned hard into sports and music and reading. I mean, one thing my wife is a teacher. If you can help your kids love reading, and there's so much research that shows the best predictor of lifelong outcomes is love of reading and competency in reading at age level 3 and 3rd grade and 7th grade. If you can make your children love reading, but the problem is the digital is a nuclear bomb on the love of reading. It makes reading boring.
Yes.
So it's delaying the computer as much as you can.
Yeah, and they won't sit, they can't learn to, they're constantly saying, but I'm bored because the digital is such a fix, it's sugar, it's a bowl of sugar. And sitting in a corner and reading a book is.
Yeah, doesn't cut it
I
anymore.
want to make it relatable to everybody in the room here. Think of watching the most exciting action movie you can think of. Liam Neeson Taken, or whatever movie. That's all adrenaline rush. And if you watch an action movie that's spiking your adrenaline and dopamine for 3 hours, and then all of a sudden I'm going to ask you to read War and Peace. Good luck. Because now you've raised your adrenaline level, and now it's hard to downshift. So we're doing that to our kids. We're putting them in this high-octane world, and now we're saying, now read a book. And the teacher sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher, because it's just too boring. So if we can the biggest suggestion I have for parents is delay the technology, at least if you can't, till 7th or 8th grade, and have them learn how to love, be voracious readers.
Yeah.
That's the best thing you can do.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. If the horse has already left the stable, if it's someone in their 20s, let's say, who's very, very media engaged, like the kids who you see in the treatment center, how do you begin to help them to slow down and withdraw from their exposure?
Well, we do a digital detox, so there's 6 weeks of no technology. And so for the first 48 hours, it's like any addict coming off of stimulant.
I can only imagine.
So there's a lot of aggression and volatility the first 48 hours, but then after that, they calm down. And we do a lot of nature immersion, a lot of group activities together, because we want to spike their I call it dopamine replacement therapy. So if we take them kayaking and hiking and playing volleyball together, so now they're beginning to experience a little bit of a dopamine rush naturally. And because we have to do that, and you can't expect a child who's been overly stimulated to sit in their room staring at the wall and think that they're all of a sudden going to be low tech.
And how would you approach that in an outpatient way, as opposed to inpatient? The immersion in the inpatient facility allows for that, but all the young people who are kind of caught up in it in life, and they are having an opportunity to self-examine, how could they, I'm a therapist, so I'm thinking, how can I help my clients who are already caught up in this?
Maybe ask them to voluntarily try to limit.
Well,
How do you?
there's it depends what the level of acuity is, right?
Yeah.
Some of my clients haven't left their room for years, and so they're pretty acute. But others are pretty high functioning, and they can benefit from an individual weekly therapist, so it depends how severe the problem has gotten. But encouraging people to just, again, start up with a 1 day of unplugging, start up with 1 day a week of unplugging, where there will be no devices, and then kind of go from there. Because you do have to reset, because what happens is your adrenal system, the thermostat gets raised on high when you're on overly stimulating devices, so you have to reset. And so sometimes that means if you can't unplug for a week, unplug for a day a week, and go from there.
Lucas, do you have any questions?
We have a question from one of our folks online. And Catherine says, what happens with the parents who just find this the best way to keep their kids out of their hair while they're doing everything? I'm paraphrasing, she said it much more eloquently. But basically, how do we teach people to parent and to teach people about the dangers we're talking about today?
The old digital babysitter.
Right.
We've all been at an airport where we see, the child is just on the device or the car. Look, it's a lot easier to neutralize a volatile child by just sticking a phone in front of them. So we know it's a great pacifier. It's a lot harder to be a low-tech parent. So I would encourage parents, you know, to some degree, I've got parents that I work with who don't want to be disabused of, because you don't want to be told that your parenting style has been harmful for your child. So don't tell me that this device is not good for my child. But if we can let parents know, no parent is knowingly doing harm to their children. Most parents won't knowingly harm their children. But if we show them the research that developmentally, especially developmentally, devices and early childhood are not a good mix.
Right.
There's been a wonderful study in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, that looked at cognition and 2-year-olds and screen time. The recommendation of the American Pediatric Society is no longer valid, about 2 hours.
What, you're waiting for 2 years?
2 years or an hour at a time, it's not good. It dampens development of an infant. So let parents know that, and they have to do you have to be a responsible parent. You can't just say, I'm going to give this to little Johnny or Susie because it's going to keep them quiet, because in the long run, you're going to be doing much more harm than good. You might be quieting Johnny and Susie for a few minutes, but at the end of the day, not good.
And be role models too, because sometimes they want to be on their own device. They don't want to be, but they need to show their child they're not on their devices all the time.
That's where I run into an issue, because I work so much and I have to do so much just to run the show. And so I don't ever give my baby the phone, but she wants it because she sees me on it.
And the interesting thing with role modeling with Lucille is not only is it social learning theory, it's like they should show the old smoking commercial, dad smoking and he takes his son fishing, and then little Johnny picks up the cigarette too. They looked at from an attachment theory standpoint, if you're in the room with your child and you're on your device and they're trying to get your attention, it's not just that you're role modeling, but now you're Nicole.
I always
the sense
put
of
it down when she
being
wants
rejected feels even more pronounced.
All right,
So sometimes it's better to step out of the room and rather than having your child internalize the idea that I'm not even worthy of the phone's attention.
Interestingly enough, I just rescued a dog, and if I'm on my iPad at all, sometimes, and I shut it, she knows right away. I mean, it's like
She jumps into your lap?
it's just it's a response to the fact knowing, okay, she's not busy or something. It just blows my mind.
No, Dan. Any other questions from the audience?
I want, go ahead.
So 5G is coming. It's already here, which means we can stream whatever we want to do, wherever we want to go, on whatever we want, on any instrument. So what do you do medically for the 5G? All those waves. And how do we say no? It's really hard, because I know I have family and they all went to counseling, but then it was more, the questions were very invasive for the parents, like it was their fault.
Yeah, we haven't even touched on EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies, and we haven't talked about those impacts. That's a whole other conversation about how toxic increased brain gliomas, brain cancer rates, because those take 10 years to really fully come into fruition. The 5G part, shorter, more invasive. I was at a conference where there was a professor emeritus from the University of Washington, who this was his wheelhouse. This is not I'm a psychologist. He was energy, he was an electrical engineer, and boy, talk about gloom and doom. After this guy's 5G presentation, I wanted to just crawl into a bunker with lead all around it, because the way he described it, 5G shorter, more skin penetrating electromagnetism, that's gonna take us home. It's a microwave. The head of neurology at UCLA, Cedars-Sinai at UCLA, talked about that you put your phone in the ear, in about 30 to 35 minutes, the microwave effect starts happening to your neurons. And so, obviously trying
Speak on speaker.
Maybe.
I just wanted to add, because you said something about the stringed instruments and all. People have heard of some of these new candlelight concerts that have been going on. And I went to one at the CPI, and little did I know, it was supposed to be a tribute to Queen, you know, the group. And I'm thinking, how am I gonna do that at CPI? It would be really loud, when are they gonna do that? And I went in and it was all stringed instruments.
Cool.
And it was, you know, they had the candlelight all around, and I've been seeing a lot of advertisements for them, so if you ever get a chance to attend any of them, they're really special. It was really great.
I saw those promos, how cool, so it was all
Yeah.
stringed Queen.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
One of the ways to restore our sanity.
Yeah.
This was fantastic.
I did want to ask one other thing, in regards to COVID, and then we were talking about teachers and that time period and what that, I mean, it was like 3 years or so of hybrid, solely virtual. I mean, it had to just be so difficult, but I also wonder if it highlighted, because a lot of kids were like, you know, so bored and wanted so bad to go back and be with other kids. And so they were isolated, and if it at all has changed their perceptions about, you know, friendships being together, you know, and teachers recognizing the importance of the group connections and
Young children who couldn't read facial cues because of the mask.
Yes,
I was one of the people who wrote an affidavit for it. It was an unmasked New York lawsuit against, class action suit against, we were talking about having little kids, and I didn't speak anything about the viral efficacy of masks. It was just strictly to do what are the psychological impacts on children, especially younger infants who couldn't see faces for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and how that impacted them. My kids went back to a hybrid classroom in Austin where we were still in Texas, and the teacher was teaching to the screen, and the 4 or 5 kids that were showing up in person were getting the teacher's butt. And it was not ideal.
no, and so many of the kids, I mean, they just got turned off. I didn't even know if they were in the room,
Yeah.
you know, when they were teaching like
Right.
virtually or what. I mean, it just was really a tough
You're not
time.
allowed to ask them to put their screen on. Apparently there was some
Yeah,
conversation
and
about
now they're
that.
saying how kids don't know how to make small talk with one another as a result of all of this stuff, and they don't know. They want to start teaching manners again because kids don't have.
They don't know how to answer a phone. They don't know how
Yeah,
to have
so
a
much
conversation on
stuff
the
that's
phone.
like, you know, revealed itself.
Yeah.
On the other hand, my grandson said it was great being on Zoom. He could get up whenever he wanted and go to the bathroom. He didn't have to raise his hand.
So we see that in the workforce, you know, the treatment program that I run in Austin, you know, a lot of our therapists and workers were in their 20s and 30s, and there was a period of work from homeism, and good luck trying to get them back to work, you know, when they had like, and we, you know, we were essential, we were residential, so we were essential service providers, and boy, it was a challenge to get people back into normal work habits again. So they were adults, or, you know, younger adults, but still. And it was interesting because the older adults were able to kind of get back to it and, you know, and handle things, where it was the 25-year-olds that were
That we're like, maybe this is where we're gonna be going someday in the future.
I'm thinking about the financial side of all of this. We have now 5 or 6 companies that have profited outrageously, and they are running the world, and they're tech companies, and they are actually responsible for this kind of, you know, abuse, really, of their consumers. And is there any effort to recoup some of that money and invest it in mental health or invest it in schools? You know, it's like we completely forget that there's a bad actor here.
Yeah, the new technocracy, right? The new technocracy, again, the most powerful people that have ever lived in terms of resources and shaping influence on society. Forget Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great, because they weren't controlling people's minds. They were controlling territory.
You mentioned some of that legislation that they're working on.
And in my book, I did look at the new technocracy and how I kind of said it feels like we suffer from a form of Stockholm syndrome because they made us captive in digital cages, and we fell in love with, we deified they became Steve Jobs and his black turtlenecks became a rock star. And so they were keeping us in digital cages, and yet we deified them. But you're right, there are some class action lawsuits now that I'm aware of, that I'm got contacted about, and they're trying to follow the playbook of Big Tobacco and Purdue and OxyContin, where families are being gathered whose children were hurt, committed suicide, or severely, impacted by these companies, and
So the data
multi-billion-dollar
reckoning could be
lawsuits. And part of that money will go towards treatment and public service campaigns. And because what's happening is every year they go in front of the Congress, Zuckerberg, Bezos, they say, we were bad, we'll get back to you with some more answers, we'll do better, and there's no
Because there's not enough teeth
Not enough teeth. So right now, there's,
to hold them accountable.
right, so the class action lawsuits would have teeth because they'll hit them where it hurts monetarily.
Right.
So that's what I think might change things.
Boycott, that's the old word.
And
What was it
boycott-
that happened
Stop buying
that
stuff.
Zuckerberg took that big hit?
Where the information got sold to.
That was very striking.
Yeah, it was monetizable our information, yeah.
You haven't mentioned anything yet about the use and misuse of social media with regard to, and the internet with regard to romance, sex, the dating apps, all of that. I'm wondering what kind of
Dating apps in terms of, well, I mean.
It has totally changed the way that we connect to other people and, the swiping of people and how people don't stay together as long because people view romantic interests as more disposable than ever before because, hey, I can just go back on the app and swipe through however many hundred of people and throw one away because they call it weird.
I'm curious, I'm a couples therapist, and I'm curious in particular whether there's any data to show something about the relationship between how people are relating, connecting emotionally and.
Yeah, I think to some degree what John's talking about, it has sort of created more of a disposable aspect to it. I mean, I know divorce rates have gone up, that's directly COVID related. I know the proliferation of pornography has become a scene where we have porn addict young people as part of their process of addiction. I know that pediatricians that I've talked to, there's a new phenomenon called adolescent erectile dysfunction, which never used to be a thing because of desensitization of pretty
Oh my God.
intense.
And that feeds
visual
into like
imagery.
the extremification loop
Well,
because that
Right.
that whole thing, it's like if you have a sick thought, the internet will meet you wherever you are.
Well, think about a young boy that gets desensitized. Back in the day, the old Playboy days, you had a magazine or something, you had a still image, and now you have pretty intensive imagery. And what's a normal relationship going to look like for that young boy or girl that's been exposed to that kind of objectifying imagery? So it's screwed up at the adolescent level, traditional relationships. Good luck going to the prom or the prom queen if you've been exposed to some of these pretty horrific pornographic images that are out there.
I teach a body-mind practice in my free time for fun, and I noticed that the younger generation will come into this essentially dance class, and sometimes they'll have a phone on themselves while we are moving. And I'm like, yeah, no, you can't have the phone on while we are moving. But what I notice mostly is they never have an internal experience of themselves. They don't experience themselves from the inside out.
I love that phrase, an internal experience of themselves. I think that's a really great way of putting it, because everything's now having to be sort of externalized and the selfie phenomenon.
And it's the biggest transition I would see for adults who learn this technique, is they would be learning the moves and looking at themselves in the mirror until they realize, oh, I can sense what I'm doing.
Right.
And then they would turn their attention into an inner awareness or interoception. That's not happening for these kids. They have no idea that there's a way to feel yourself move your foot.
If I twirled and the world didn't see it, did I actually do it?
Corollary to what you've said, what I noticed a lot that people I don't think were aware enough about was the impact on creativity. And so when you have children or teenagers asking to draw a picture, write a story, what we weren't realizing is that one of the things that really fosters creativity is allowing kids to be bored, right? A bored kid has to use their active imagination to play make-believe. So now make-believe is a thing of yesteryear, because now kids are getting such a vivid imagery. So all those, they don't have to construct the image in their mind's eye. So I do an exercise when I do conferences sometimes where I'll ask people in the room to think of a song that you've seen the music video for. And I'll ask this group, think of a song that you've seen the music video for. Take a moment. And what
Take
pops,
on me.
what comes to mind? What comes to mind when you think of that song?
He's going through the mirror.
Typically, if you've seen a music video and it's a favorite song, the video comes to mind. You can't unlink the two. The visual image pops into your mind and you can't uncouple it. So people think of Michael Jackson Thriller if you see the video. But now think of a song that you haven't seen the video for, and typically what comes to mind is a very unique personal experience of where you were when you first heard that song. It's an interior creative process.
Oh my God, that's so true.
And what we don't appreciate is what we've done with infants and children, where we've overloaded them with visual imagery. We've robbed them of that creative aspect of their mind to create the picture. Because we've drilled a hole in their heads and we've just poured in really graphic imagery, whether it's video gaming or social media or whatever it is. And then you ask that I've had to work with these kids when they're 15, draw me a picture. I draw you a picture, entertain me. I can't draw you a picture, I don't know how that works. Kids, there was a study where children today couldn't play with blocks. They didn't know how to put blocks one on top of the other. They didn't know how to do the most fundamental hand-eye piece because they were used to just staring at a screen. So there's subtle and not so subtle impacts that have happened that some we're getting more aware of, like the depression and suicide part. But there's other fundamental societal impacts that are not so great. But I feel like I'm ending with a downer here. Bring it back up a little.
Don't even know how to play with blocks. I go home and play with blocks with my baby.
I think there's a great success story here on the island that I just read about in the Reporter, and I have to give great props to the school for deciding this year that cell phones will be turned in at the door.
Shelter Island.
Shelter Island School. And I think it's, I mean, we have more power than we think. That's the point.
And I would ask that if you're a member of Children on School, that you call and support this initiative, because there are lots of parents who think their children should have access 24/7 to them. There are lots of
Emergencies.
Because of this.
Yes, I mean, the whole thing they came up with was so the teacher could take the metal box out in case there's an emergency and give the kids their phones. Like the kids will have it at lunch, they will have it in between classes, they will still be able to bully on social media.
They'll have it in the classroom, like
They will not have it in classroom, there will be a metal box, they will put the thing in the metal box in each classroom.
But that's what I'm saying, it's in the classroom though, so
It's
if
in the
there's an
classroom in the metal box, and then
emergency.
when they leave, they take the cell phone and they go out. So if there's an emergency, the teacher can grab the metal box, because let's make sure we have our cell phones, and then come outside with the children so they can have their phones.
That policy, as described, is the gold standard.
Yeah.
That's the
That's
ideal
beautiful.
policy. 2 thumbs up on that one. That's
So
great.
everybody appreciate the school, call them, right, give them support for this.
That's great.
Yes.
I just retired from a boys' high school in Nassau. They were never allowed to use their phones. The phone came out, it went into their locker, and then when they went home, they got their phone.
Private school, you said?
Private school. But the one thing I did see with the boys, because boys will be boys, they're on those darn games at night, they had sleep difficulties. You don't even know how many kids were going to see a sleep therapist.
I used to sit on CSC committees and there would be we need to do a sleep study, and then you would ask the most basic question. What time is little Johnny on his game? Oh, he's gaming till 3 a.m. It has something to do with him playing his
And the parents don't know, but I get it out of them.
Right.
You know, I sit long enough and talk with them. I said, oh, Fortnite?
Right.
Keep the phone, what? You don't want the phone like in the bed or even in the bedroom if you can help it.
Surrender the phone, but we talk about sleep hygiene 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, or else it's still stimulating.
Right.
The teacher who was mentioned in that article told me today at the diner that he has 3 hamburgers. A kid told me that the teacher has has a hammer in his desk. So I knew who it was. And I went up to the teacher. He says, I have 3 hammers. I have one for Samsung. And I forget the other one.
That's 3.
And when he sees a kid picking up the phone, he goes into his drawer,
Gets his
pulls a hammer out, and says, "What kind of phone is that?" And
Private
funny.
school?
his first name is Peter.
Peter.
Private school.
Shelter Island School.
Shelter Island,
Yeah.
Peter.
Amazing.
That's a good one. Did you hear that?
See, we brought it back up.
That's
We brought it back up. Just bring in the hammers.
The hammer like the move.
It's that time for us to finish.
This was so fun.
Yeah, it's great.
It is.
It's really
Did you
been
guys
great.
have a good time?
I wanted to give Dr. Kardaras just a chance to mention your treatment places. There's one in Austin, and you have something here too?
No, it's under,
Okay,
we're thinking about opening up something on the East End.
please
but-
do.
Yeah.
And you might want to mention your Maui place that is not, you're not there anymore, but
Well,
how?
it's there, the Maui place, yeah, so
Yeah.
I still actively run and oversee Omega Recovery in Austin, Texas, 17 to 30-year-olds, failure to launch is the profile of folks that we treated, and I had Maui Recovery, which we
Yeah.
divested of 7 months ago, but it's still my old staff that runs the place, it's still there treating
And they're
people.
okay?
They're all okay, except one of our workers was the one that was on all the news. He was one of the ones that lived in Lahaina that had to jump into the ocean and was floating on the board with a family of 5. And Juby was our overnight
Baby.
with a 2-year-old on his neck. So a horrible tragedy there, but it was amazing to talk to them about how they all rallied together as Ohana, as family, to support one another, which gave me hope for this whole digital world that we're in, that people still were able to help one another the old-fashioned way. People were really helping one another, and kindness and compassion really showed itself. They weren't waiting for FEMA, because FEMA wasn't showing up. But thank you for, and the reason why we had opened up that program in Hawaii was part of the antidote of tech overuse was having programs close to nature. And so it was a very nature immersive program, and it still is. I'm just not involved in it anymore.
Well, thank you so much, and also, we do have copies of your book out front, and if you're interested, and I know Dr. Kardaras said he would sign them, so if you'd like to purchase one, please do. And, thanks Gianna for making the trip, and,
Thank you, Lucille. Thank you for coordinating all this, and thank you,
it wasn't just me,
Shelter Island.
we had a team.